due to the fact that industrial cities were on the rise. After 1800, the majority of the population in Europe had began to move into cities. This was basically caused by what was known as the factory system, where the manufacturing of goods was becoming concentrated in a central locale. This is also called urbanization, where there is city building and then people are migrating or moving into said cities. London was a major industrial center of England at this time. It became one of Europe's largest cities, actually the largest city in Europe, with a population of over 1 million by 1800. One of the big things to remember here, guys, is that most of these factories were placed near rivers. You have the Thames in England and London, and so you've got people gravitating toward those water sources like we've learned throughout the course of world history. Capital letter B, though, one of the issues that came about because of this are the living conditions. England began to expand so rapidly that the government just didn't have enough time to develop plans or sanitary codes or building codes. Cities in England lacked things like adequate housing, education, and police forces to keep order. Working families did not make very much, and they lived in shacks or shelters with whole families crowding into one bedroom. These dwellings were known as tenements, and some dwellings like this still exist, and they are still called tenements. One of the big picture consequences of this type of an arrangement is the disease and the spread of said disease, which led to a shortened lifespan during these times. Now, there is an important primary source about all of this. It is found on page 724, and it is by a female journalist named Elizabeth Gaskell. I would highly recommend that you guys take a look into that. Capital letter C says working conditions. Working conditions were drastic. They were very difficult. Most workers in these type of factory towns worked 14-hour days and 6 days a week. They barely had time for lunch. Machines were spinning around, so you might get injured. You may be working with spinning machines, making clothing, and get your own shirt or your hair caught in them, and it would mangle your arm or your face. This was very drastic, and they had no protection for workers at this time. There were no labor unions. There were no laws that restricted how many hours you could work and things of that nature. Point number 3, coal miners actually had it the worst. They had an average lifespan of 10 years less than the... Okay, so we got cut off there just a tad bit, and where I left off was right about Roman numeral number 2, social class tensions. Capital letter A says the middle class. Even though poverty was sort of the main description for the working class, the Industrial Revolution did create enormous amounts of wealth for countries, and especially people in the upper middle class and people who were owning factories and things of that nature. The middle class emerged in many parts of Europe. It was a social class made up of skilled workers, professionals, business people, and wealthy farmers. Factory owners, people that were shipping goods, people that were buying and selling things, those are all people that made up sort of the middle class. There was also two portions of the middle class. There's the upper middle class, which was exemplified by people like government employees, doctors, lawyers, managers of factories, managers of mines, and managers of shops. And then in the lower middle class, you had people who generally worked for people in the upper middle class, tool makers, mechanics, and printers. The working class was the highest amount of population. They were growing pretty frustrated with their situations because machines began to take away a lot of their jobs and making things by hand. People literally began to rage against the machine. I mean, they took out their angers against those machines that were stealing their jobs. The Luddites were one group that were really well known for this. They were a group of workers. They traveled throughout northern England, attacking factories and destroying machines. Now, Roman numeral 3 takes a look at some of the positive effects of the Industrial Revolution and industrialization process. Most of what I talked about today has been, fairly negative. But if you look closely at it, there in the long term, there were some positive effects, such as jobs. Increase in jobs definitely took place. An increase in wealth of countries from all the goods that they were shipping out. Number 3, technological inventions, factories, the machines that went into those factories. A higher standard of living, an increased production of goods. This is obvious from the Industrial Revolution. A better diet. Food became, more abundant. You could get fresh food by way of the train. Shipping was getting better. People could afford to buy more food because they generally had a living wage. Then number 7, clothing became cheaper because it's being produced in these factories in a massive way. And then it's all about supply and demand. The more you have, the lower the price is going to be. Capital letter A, there was also an expansion for educational opportunities. A lot of the factories either put children to work, or while the parents were working in the factories, they built schools where the children could study. Finally, Roman numeral 4 is a case study of the city of Manchester. You can refer to the textbook. There's some very important pages to read here, 726 to 728. The last thing for this lesson is to understand that we're going to move into the spread of industrialization in section 3, which is going to talk about how the industrialization process and the Industrial Revolution expanded into other parts of Europe, and then, of course, eventually to the United States of America. Thank you.